Hey guys, Bailey here, and in today's video I'm going to be going over everything you need to know before through hiking the Colorado Trail. So this is essentially going to be answers to a lot of the most frequently asked questions when people are first trying to decide whether they want to through hike this trail. I've through hiked it twice. Once in 2018, it was my first through hike, and then again this last summer in 2024 with my dogs and boyfriend. I've also through hiked the Continental Divide Trail, which shares a route with the Colorado Trail for about 300 miles. And then I've hiked many of the segments again on other long distance hikes and weekend backpacking trips. So really, I've hiked most of the segments at least 3 times at this point. Some of the questions that I see most frequently asked are things like the best time to hike, resupply, water, how scenic is it, things like that. So I'm just gonna kind of go through starting off with some basic trail information. To start, the Colorado Trail is approximately 500 miles, spanning from Denver to Durango in the state of Colorado. The Colorado Trail strives to hit some of the most scenic parts of the state, like the Collegiate Peaks, 10 Mile Range, and San Juan Mountains. Many people want to know how long it takes to hike it. On average, most people spend 4 to 6 weeks. Some people hike it shorter. It's definitely doable to do it in 3 weeks if you have a pretty light setup and you're hiking a lot of miles every day. But for the average person, an enjoyable experience, I think 4 or 5 weeks is about average. 6 weeks is if you're taking a pretty leisurely pace and or a lot of days off. When I hiked it in 2018, it took me about 31 days. When we hiked it this last summer, it took closer to 5 weeks. Partially just because we took more days off for the dogs. Just so you know, most people tend to hike it southbound, so they start in Denver and hike to Durango. It's considered the more scenic direction to finish in the San Juans. It also gives you a chance to get more acclimated to the altitude as the trail starts lower. The climbs are not so steep at the beginning for approximately the first 70 miles. Then it starts ramping up once you get towards Georgia Pass. This could be good or bad. If you're hiking southbound, you're gonna have more people going the same direction. You also might see less people though, because you're kind of moving at a similar pace. Generally, people that hike northbound are going to see more people every day if you're hiking during peak season. The next thing most people wanna know is when is the best time to hike the Colorado Trail? Generally speaking, if you want a snow-free experience, July, August, and September are the best months to hike the Colorado Trail. Most years, on average, the Colorado Trail is snow-free by July 1st, but really it just depends on the snowpack and which direction you're hiking. For example, this year we have had an abysmal snow year down in the San Juans. So if you wanted to hike it northbound, you could conceivably start in June and not see any snow, depending on how the rest of our spring turns out. Most other years for people hiking southbound, really the first snow you're going to encounter will be on Georgia Pass. It just kind of depends on how much snow you get on the Front Range. It's possible to hike southbound too, starting in June, if you're willing to deal with some snow patches. It just, again, depends on how much snow and how quickly it's melting. On the back end of things, usually if you hike in September, you might get a dusting of snow. When I hiked the CDT, I got it snowed on a little bit at the beginning of September. And my experience living in Denver is we pretty much always got snow in the high country around Labor Day, but it'd just be about an inch and it would melt off pretty fast. However, by October 1st, that's when things are starting to stick. And you just don't know when or if you're going to get a big unexpected snowstorm that dumps a whole bunch of snow. It might be really beautiful. I was still in Colorado on the CDT in October when I hiked it, and I didn't really have too much snow until I got right close to New Mexico. But it's just, you don't know if you're gonna get a big dumping by that point. So it's best to plan to be done by October 1st. The next big concern for planning, of course, is do you need a permit to hike the Colorado Trail? Unlike the JMT, which requires permits, the nice thing about the Colorado Trail is you can hike the whole thing without needing to plan ahead at all. When we hiked the Colorado Trail in 2024, we basically made the decision a week before we decided to through hike it when we were in Alaska and trying to change our plans, drove home for a week, and then basically packed in a day and hit the trail. There is one section where you technically need a pass. It's like a state wildlife pass through Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and it's just the first half mile of segment 12 in the Collegiate East. If you decide to hike the Collegiate West, then you don't even need this pass. It's just regular self-registration permits. In wilderness areas that are free, you just fill one out as you go, but you don't need to pay for a permit ahead of time or apply for a lottery like on the JMT or like you would in a lot of the national parks. One of the things that makes the Colorado Trail extremely unique is the high elevation and the alpine scenery that you will find when you hike it. The high point of the Colorado Trail is Connie Summit, which is in the San Juans. That's that section between Lake City and Silverton. So when you're hiking between Spring Creek Pass in Carson Saddle. It's a little bit closer to Carson Saddle. And that elevation for that point is 13,272 feet. There's a nice little sign there. It's not really like a mountain peak or anything, but you can go up to a point if you want. And honestly, that section's one of the most scenic anyways, so it's just kind of like a nice end to the trail when you've got your trail legs if you're hiking southbound. According to the Colorado Trail Foundation, the average elevation of the Colorado Trail is around 10,000 feet above sea level. So if you are prone to altitude sickness or have any conditions that might be difficult to deal with altitude, then that's just something to keep in mind, is that the trail overall is quite high up. Most people don't realize too that our tree line is quite high. It's around 11,000 feet in northern Colorado and 12,000 feet in southern Colorado due to different latitudes. So even though you could be 10,000 feet or 11,000 feet above sea level, you might not necessarily have alpine views. I talked to some people the first time I hiked it that were very surprised about that on the first couple segments. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind when you're planning. With that altitude in mind as well, we do get a lot of monsoon thunderstorms in the summer in July. So when you're hiking above tree line, you just need to make sure to be careful and plan ahead and pay attention to the weather in order to stay safe and avoid lightning strikes. So I'm not going to go into super crazy detail on gear in this video. If you would like me to make a specific Colorado Trail gear video, I'm happy to do that. But a couple of considerations if you want to know what's kind of similar and different about gear for the Colorado Trail versus maybe some other long distance trails, I do have a few things I want to point out. The first is that we do have a lot of fire bans in Colorado, just like a lot of the rest of the Western United States. Generally, when we have a stage 2 fire ban, you are required to use a stove that has an on and off switch. So that means things like little twig stoves and like alcohol stoves would be illegal during those times. So if you're the kind of person that cooks your food, you want to make sure to pick a stove like an MSR Pocket Rocket that has an on and off switch. The next thing that has changed the last couple of years is due to higher amounts of people using the trail and just out backpacking in general. The natural forests that are closer to Denver on the Colorado Trail, so really the first half of the Colorado Trail, do require you to store your food properly for bears. That doesn't necessarily have to be a bear can or even an Ursack, but you have to at least hang it in those sections legally. Once you get past that, there are no legal requirements for that, but that's just something that you should keep in mind for your planning purposes. When I've talked to people from the East Coast that haven't hiked out west much, one thing they mention frequently is how surprised they are about the temperature swings. It can be right around freezing at night when you're camping, especially if it's in like a meadow or really high elevation. And then during the day, it can get up into the 80s and even the 90s when you're thinking about sections like between Salida and Lake City, down in the Cochetopas, or those sections right out of Denver that are lower in elevation. For that reason, I would say when you're thinking about your clothing, it's important to bring plenty of layers and know how to use them. And then make sure to choose a sleeping bag that is relatively warm for at night. Another impact of the high altitude on the Colorado Trail is that we do get a lot of UV exposure just from being closer to the sun. So make sure to bring sunscreen. A lot of people these days use sun hoodies, but that's just something to plan for, is that you will be exposed much more to the sun, both from a heat standpoint, but also just from like a skincare standpoint. As for bugs, it really depends on the year. We generally don't tend to be as buggy as other parts of the United States, but sometimes it can happen, especially along water sources or after an especially wet snow year. I don't think bug spray is necessarily as essential here, nor is a head net. Really, it just comes down more to considering if you want your shelter to be fully enclosed or not. So if you're wondering how much water is available along the trail, this is partially going to come down to your own past experience hiking in arid environments. I don't find the Colorado to be too dry, but I also hike in the desert a lot. If you're coming from maybe the East Coast or somewhere with plenty of water, then you might find it to be somewhat dry. Generally speaking, the driest segments of the Colorado Trail are segment 2, going through the Buffalo Creek burn area. It's just very, very exposed and it can be very hot, especially in July and August. So even though it's only about 10 miles, it's just really important to make sure that you either have proper heat tolerance, plenty of water, or you just wait to hike it during the cooler part of the day. The Cochetopa Hills are also known for being quite dry with not as many water sources. It kind of depends on the year. If it's a low water year or drought year, so when I hiked it in 2018, there were not nearly as many water sources, but during an average snow year, there's usually water every 10 or 15 miles or so. The longest water carry tends to be on Indian Trail Ridge, which is just before Durango. So this waterless section is about 20 miles from Straight Creek to Taylor Lake. It's towards the end, so most people deal with it just fine. There is a seep that tends to have water most years, about halfway in between. It's marked on far out, so if you're using that app, then you should be able to find it. And there should be water comments to let you know whether it's flowing that year or not. Generally speaking though, there's plenty of water. You shouldn't have to carry water for more than like 5 miles or so. 20 is the longest, anywhere from 5 to 15 are some of the bigger ones. As for resupply, this is just going to depend on how quickly you hike and how frequently you're willing to hitchhike into town. Generally speaking, when I've hiked in the past, I've resupplied at Frisco, Twin Lakes, Salida, Lake City, Silverton, and then Durango at the end. So that's about 5 different resupplies. My longest carry is usually about 6 days, partially just because I'm hiking with the dogs. You could make those shorter if you're willing to hitchhike into places like Gunnison. It just takes some patience to reach some of those locations. Most of the towns are very used to hikers and very friendly. You can pretty much resupply just by buying stuff in every town, which is a good way to help support our local economy. Or you can mail your own packages to post offices or do kind of like a mix and match strategy of both. If you aren't comfortable hitchhiking, it is possible to do the entire Colorado Trail without hitchhiking. Frisco and Breckenridge have a bus system. Twin Lakes is right on trail. There's an RV park on the Collegiate East that accepts packages at Highway 50, and then there's a volunteer-run shuttle in Lake City that can take you to town, and then Mullis Pass also accepts packages. So those are options if you're not comfortable with hitchhiking. As for starting and finishing the trail, Denver is pretty easy to deal with. We have a nice light rail system that can get you pretty close. You'll want to go to the South Mineral Station in Littleton, which will get you very close to the trail, about 20 minutes away. And then from there, you can either take an Uber or coordinate with a trail angel to get you to the main Waterton Canyon trailhead. You can also do the same to get to the Roxborough trailhead. Indian Creek, you might want to use a trail angel, or if you can get close to Lake Sedalia, you can probably just hitchhike from there. That's what we did this last year when we hiked the Colorado Trail. Durango, on the other hand, is a little bit more difficult. We don't have nearly so much public transit here. There is a small regional airport, although the flights can sometimes be quite expensive and we don't fly to very many places. There's a bus that also goes from Durango to Grand Junction, I believe once a week, and then you can take the Greyhound from there to Denver or wherever you're going. It is not always reliable. The Greyhound sometimes overbooks. You could also go to the airport and get a rental car, although our rental cars get booked out pretty far in advance, so it can be difficult to get one and also kind of expensive. It's also important to know that our regional airport is about 15 to 20 minutes outside of town, so that can make getting there a little bit difficult. Some people also choose to hitchhike home. If you're hitchhiking towards Denver, that's something you could do too, is at least get close and then take public transit from there. Some people want to know if there's cell service on the Colorado Trail. To be honest, this is something I don't pay super close attention to. I tend to keep my phone on airplane mode when I'm through hiking, but I understand for some people it's important to be able to book hotels in advance and that kind of thing. Generally speaking, Verizon has historically had the best coverage in Colorado, although I think that AT&T and T-Mobile are getting much better. Most of the time, valleys that are far away from town are going to be a no-go. Peaks and ridges tend to be much better, so if you get up high, you have a better chance and you can check. If you are closer to Denver in the Front Range, even like the Arkansas Valley, then you have a better chance of having cell reception, especially up high. Once you get closer to Durango, the likelihood kind of goes down, but it's surprising how many places you can, get a bar or two if you are willing to just check when you're up on a ridge. The last thing I'm going to cover in this video is whether or not dogs are allowed on the Colorado Trail. The Colorado Trail is an especially dog-friendly trail because the only section where they are not allowed is the first 6 miles in Waterton Canyon if you start at the traditional trailhead. This is just because the Denver Water Board owns that road and they don't want to allow dogs because it's protected bighorn habitat. However, there is an alternate start. You can start at the Indian Creek trailhead and then hike from there. That's what I did on my last through hike of the Colorado Trail, and it's just a fine trailhead as well. Other than that, they're allowed everywhere else. There are leash laws in the wilderness areas close to Denver, but once you get further away from Denver and the San Juans, they're not required. Most dogs do pretty well. The biggest thing to watch out for is that it can be very hot the first couple of segments between Denver and Kenosha Pass. It can also be pretty warm in the Cochetopas, even in the summer. And then the other thing too is that a lot of dogs can have foot problems because we have a lot of granite that makes up our trails, especially that pink Pikes Peak granite. It just gets broken down into gravel that kind of makes up the trail, and over time it can just make them pretty footsore if you're not careful. Fortunately, Colorado's pretty dog friendly. There's a lot of places to stay in towns. There's a lot of restaurants you can take them to and sit outside. So overall, I think it's a good choice if you are looking to thru hike with your dog. So those are the answers I have to some of the most commonly asked questions. I know there are plenty of other things I can cover, so if you have other questions, feel free to ask them below. I will do my best to answer. If there's enough questions that aren't on this video, then I'll just go ahead and make another one at some point. If you are looking for more resources, I'll link a whole bunch in the description, but the Colorado Trail Foundation is a wonderful resource. They have a great website that answers most of these questions as well. There's a guidebook that you can buy that's also great to leave with friends and family while you're gone hiking, as it shows all the segments and everything. They have a data book if you prefer to use that for navigation instead of like an app, especially if you're not big into technology. That's what I did when I hiked it the first time. They also have a really great Facebook page where lots of people will answer your questions. Some other good resources are the Far Out app. It's interactive. It has crowdsourced comments on all the different water sources and things, and you can see where you are. And then I'm also happy, as I said, to answer questions as well. If you would like to see kind of what the Colorado Trail looks like, I have made videos of my most recent thru hike, and I will definitely link that playlist below. Overall though, the Colorado Trail is a wonderful trail. It's supposed to be mile for mile the most beautiful trail in America, and it's certainly a lovely hiking experience thanks to the wonderful grading and beautiful views that make all of your effort totally worth it. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching.